And we're really very fortunate to have this group of people to speak to us today and to introduce this subject of the female silversmiths of southern Oman. I expect that some of you have some knowledge of the silver that is available in Oman, but deep enough. Certainly my wife and I have had fun digging around in the souks in various places in Muscat and elsewhere when we were living in Oman. But it'll be a great opportunity today for us all to learn a great deal more. We welcome Musa Al-Wardi, who is the Director for Collections Department at the National Museum of Oman in Muscat. Dhofar, whose work on the craft heritage of Oman will probably be familiar to a number of you. Certainly I have a volume sitting up here on my bookshelves. Adornment, who will be taking us through the lecture today. She is, as it were, the genuine hostess, as it were, an art scientist at the Department of Scientific Research at the British Museum. Fahmida Suleiman, curator of Islamic art and culture at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. So many thanks to you all for coming, and I'm going to hand over now to Adornment to take us through this enthralling, intriguing topic, the female silversmiths of southern Oman. Aud, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. So I will try to share my screen and hand over to Fahmida, who will give us the setting and the introduction. So there we are. So can everyone see the presentation then?
Great. Okay, I can see it.
Perfect.
All right, let's begin. Hi, I'm Fahmida Suleiman, and on behalf of my co-presenters and myself, I would like to start by thanking the Anglo-Omani Society for inviting us to speak today and for Chairman Stuart Lang's kind introduction. Our talk is divided into parts. Next slide, please. In the first part, I will provide a broad overview and set the historical and geographic scene for our project. In part 2, Marcia will take us back to her earliest encounters with female artisans in Oman and share some of the projects she undertook over a period of 25 years to document Oman's artisanal heritage. Next, in part 3, Moza will share her experiences of preserving and promoting Oman's heritage of silversmithing, including the impact of the newly built National Museum of Oman. And in the fourth and final part, Aude will explain some of the scientific analysis she has undertaken at the British Museum in studying the techniques of decoration and manufacture of Omani silver jewelry. So I should stress at the outset that our research project is still a work in progress, which has been temporarily paused due to the pandemic. This collaborative project is jointly sponsored by the British Museum, the National Museum of Oman, the Royal Ontario Museum, and the Anglo-Omani Society. And we are very grateful for the Society's support. Next slide, please. So let's start with a map. I know this audience is very familiar with Oman, but I'm going to show you some of the particularities of where we were doing our research. Our story focuses on the Sultanate's southern and largest governorate of Dhofar, which is, as we all know, also referred to as the land of frankincense alongside neighboring Yemen, from where the valuable aromatic resin has been cultivated and traded for millennia. Our research was conducted mainly in the capital, in Salalah, and in the coastal town of Taka, just east of the capital city. So the maps indicate where Salalah and Taka are. We've included a picture of Taka Castle, which we'll come back to, and a wonderful fishing boat with sewn planks called a kambari, which until the 1980s was the most commonly used vessel in Dhofar, but now there are only 5 left in the world. This picture was taken in 1969. Okay, next slide. The tradition of silversmithing in Oman dates back to at least the early 19th century, but probably earlier. And traditional Omani jewelry has maintained a remarkable continuity of style over the ages. This is evident from the jewelry once owned by the Omani princess, Sayyida Salme bint Said, the daughter of one of the most powerful rulers of Oman and Zanzibar, Sultan Said bin Sultan. Her portrait is shown on the bottom right. A selection of her personal belongings, shown on the top right, dating to the 1860s, is now housed at the National Museum of Oman, and several of her silver pieces correspond directly in style to those from the mid-20th century, such as the pair of silver anklets shown on the far left, which date to around 1950. Princess Salme's memoirs, published in 1866, provide a first-hand account of the significance and use of silver jewelry in the broader Omani context. And we'll come back to her personal belongings in Moza's section. Next slide, please. Now, individual pieces of Omani jewelry are imbued with religious significance as well as beauty and function. A woman's jewelry indicates her financial and marital status. It often represents her tribal or regional identity and protects her from the evil eye or the eye of envy. Verses from the Quran feature prominently in Omani jewelry, either as engraved inscriptions or as a rolled up page sealed inside a decorated Quran case, a hearse. Quran case necklaces are worn in combination with silver pendants set with natural materials, such as coral, carnelian, fox and wolf teeth, or the tips of gazelle horn. And these are also thought to protect the wearer from evil influences and to bring happiness and good health. The necklace with the red pendant shown on the bottom, worn by little girls, features a red bicycle reflector. Next slide, please. Jewelry represents an Omani woman's financial security and her personal assets. The silver used to make jewelry in the 19th and 20th centuries was obtained by melting down Maria Theresa thaler coins. Minted in Austria from 1741, thalers had a high silver content and functioned as trade currency in the Middle East and Africa. Imported coins like the thaler, along with Indian rupees and Saudi riyals, were also fashioned into pendants for Omani necklaces. Elements such as coral and carnelian were added to jewelry not only for their monetary value, but also for their amuletic properties. According to a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, carnelian, or akik, is believed to banish poverty, whereas coral, marjan, mentioned in the Quran as a symbol of God's mercy and bounty, is thought to possess curative powers. Red and orange beads, pendants, and charms made from more affordable substitutes, such as ceramic, glass, and resin, were also thought to possess the beneficial properties of coral and carnelian by virtue of their color. Following the discovery of oil in the region, the use of gold decoration on Omani jewelry gained popularity from the 1960s onwards, during a time when earnings increased and vast quantities of gold were readily available from neighboring Dubai. The taste for small gilded embellishments added to silver jewelry later developed into a demand for pieces made entirely of gold. Next slide, please. So today, we are focusing mainly on silver jewelry, but as you all know, Omani silversmiths produce a range of objects, from daggers and swords to coffee pots and coal pots. The style and decoration of silver objects are regionally specific, but in very general terms, jewelry from the northern regions of Oman is generally heavier and larger in size, whereas jewelry made in the south generally tends to be smaller, daintier, and perhaps more jingly. So the the images on the bottom are the southern pieces. I've just included a northern coffee pot and a northern and dagger. The little Quran cases at the top right, they're kind of a mixture of north and south, but these are all from the collection of the British Museum. And Ian McLeish, who collected the southern material, he collected all of those hers pendants from Salalah. So they're kind of a mix of some Yemeni, some Omani. We'll get into that a bit later. Next slide, please. Over time, the demand for the silversmith's craft has declined in recent years due to shifting tastes in fashion, greater prosperity, and the higher status accorded to gold. The majority of Omani silversmiths who are skilled in traditional techniques of jewelry manufacture are of an advanced age, and the future sustainability of this time-honored craft remains uncertain. The majority of Omani silversmiths are also male and live in the northern cities of Muscat, Nizwa, and Sur, such as Salim bin Nasser bin Salim al-Shareki, shown in the center, an 80-year-old practicing silversmith from Nizwa. However, during the mid-20th century, there were several female silversmiths in Dhofar who were trained by men and often belonged to families of silversmiths. Ghalia Ali Al-Bas, seen on the right, now in her 80s, is a long retired silversmith who also took up goldsmithing for a time to meet the demands of her clientele. A true entrepreneur, she also made ceramic incense burners and ran a beauty salon and spa in her heyday. The only surviving female silversmith in present-day Oman, to our knowledge, is Tuful bint Ramadan Awad bin Khalif, shown on the left, who is now in her early 80s. Next slide, please. Salim bin Ashareki's work was featured in my 2011 exhibition at the British Museum, Adornment and Identity, Jewelry and Costume from Oman. And this was also when Aude and I started working together on the analysis of the British Museum's collection of Omani jewelry. This was also how I met Marcia and her co-author Neil Richardson for the first time. And they helped me with the selection of objects for the exhibition, and we acquired a number of textiles and objects from Oman. This is when we first started discussing the unique tradition of female silversmithing in Oman, because Marcia and Neil's 2-volume publication, The Craft Heritage of Oman, is the only publication that has ever mentioned this tradition, at least in the English language. So this occasion allowed us to plant the seed for the project we are working on now. And that's just an image of the poster. There's a shot from the exhibition itself. And there's the technical research bulletin, the article that Aude and I and Nigel Meeks wrote. It's online, and we can post it in the chat later. Next slide. Right, okay. The core of our talk here. This is where Tuful Ramadan was born and brought up, and where she began to learn the silversmith's craft. It's a small coastal town of Taka, east of the capital city of Salalah. We visited Tuful in Taka in March 2019, and she welcomed us into her home and workshop and shared her fascinating life story with us. We were meant to go back in May last year, but our plans were canceled. We all know why. Next slide. Now, Tuful began silversmithing at the age of 14 and was first taught by her brother-in-law, who hailed from a famous family of silversmiths in Oman called the Bashwan family. She confirmed that both male and female silversmiths were active in Oman in the early 20th century. During our interview with Tuful, we asked her how it all began and whether she found silversmithing difficult. And she replied, and I quote, "For me, it was a hobby. And if you have the desire to do something as a hobby, then nothing is difficult. But if it is something you do for fame and reputation, then you will not accomplish anything, unquote. Tuful was widowed in her mid-20s and managed to raise her 3 sons on her own as a skilled silversmith. She also became an avid collector of 20th century Omani material, from pottery, woodwork, and weaponry to textiles and everyday items such as mobile phones, transistor radios, and gramophones. In 1998, Tuful received the Perfect House Award from the Ministry of Municipalities, and she subsequently received the Best Mother Award from a women's charity for her dedication and hard work in raising her children as a widow for over 25 years. In Tuful's words, and I quote, "I learned silversmithing. Then my husband passed away, and my youngest child was 2 months and 16 days. My eldest was 5 years old, and the middle one was 3.5 years old. And I worked for them. Their uncle is a wealthy man, but I never asked him for a single rial, neither from my aunt, who is also wealthy. In my whole life, I never asked for financial help, not even a rial, neither from my mother, nor my sister, or from anyone else. And, alhamdulillah, my children live the best life. The most important thing is to depend on yourself and contentment," end quote. Tuful shared several of her silversmithing techniques with us in her little workshop on the ground floor of her home, which also served as a gallery to display her finished pieces and her ethnographic collection. In part 4 of the talk, Aude will share some of Tuful's techniques with us. These are just examples of us doing our research in Tuful's little room and some of her finished pieces. Next slide, please. Tuful also explained how Dhofari women traditionally wear their silver jewelry by adorning her granddaughter from head to toe with her own pieces. A headdress, earrings, multiple necklaces, bracelets, finger rings, and jingling anklets. Today, thanks to her perseverance and silversmithing skills, Tuful lives in a multi-story extended family home with her children and grandchildren. She sells her handmade pieces from her home and at many annual festivals in Dhaka. But what is the future for silver jewelry and female silversmithing in Oman? Next slide, please. The findings from our trip to the gold market in Salalah, where we interviewed a number of Omani and Pakistani jewelers, was mixed. On the one hand, jewelers confirmed that their younger clientele prefer to wear European-style jewelry in gold or rent glitzy, bejeweled tiara sets made in the Far East. So you've got the European-style jewelry on the right and these tiaras on the left. Next slide. But all is not lost. Silver jewelry, dating from the 1950s, are preciously guarded by jewelers and hired out for weddings and special occasions at a premium daily rate. Also, older clientele prefer traditional styles of silver jewelry made from gold, as shown on the top left and bottom right. So traditional designs are not forgotten. Jewelry designers are also coming up with interesting ways of adapting old patterns into contemporary wearable designs, such as the pair of earrings on the top right. Omani silver jewelry from the mid-20th century is still available for purchase from reputable antique dealers in Muscat's Matra Souk, although the market is also rife with imitations. Tariq bin Mohammed al-Balushi, shown on the bottom center, with Marsha and Aude, hails from a family of Omani silversmiths and antique dealers. and he commissions new pieces for the tourist market of high quality that are based on long-established patterns for modern tastes. I'm actually wearing one of his modern sumped pieces right now. I can show you later. With the support of the Omani Women's Association of Dhaka, Tuful has tried to pass on her skills to at least 3 younger women, but various circumstances have prevented them from pursuing the trade as a living. Here, Moza is shown on the bottom left, speaking to one of those trainee silversmiths, Lubna Kharj Abdullah. Next slide, please. There are far too many jewelers in the market who are catering to the constantly shifting tastes of modern Omanis, and the younger generation of female silversmiths simply cannot compete without the help of governments and other influential institutions. Our discussions with members of the Women's Association were lively and engaging, and there seemed to be a renewed commitment to help Lubna and others like her who are eager to revive the tradition of female silversmithing in the region if they can find a willing teacher. Our plan to support this wonderful tradition at risk is to continue to research, publish, and talk about it. And we are planning an exhibition at the British Museum towards the end of this year that will travel to our respective institutions in the post-pandemic future. Is the tradition of female silversmithing worth saving in Oman? Tuful's answer was to the point and brilliant. Quote, "Yes," she said, "accuracy is in the woman's nature. The man also works well, but the woman is known for making delicate objects," unquote. Now, Marsha will take over the virtual podium for part 2 of our talk.
Could I just interrupt before Marsha speaks to say to our audience that if people have questions, I hope we'll have time after the presentation for sending your questions. Do so using the writing them in the chat facility at the bottom of your screens.
Well, thank you, Famida, for a wonderful introduction, really for a wonderful summation. I would like to talk a little bit about the origins in a bit of a reminiscent way. I have very few images from the early times of the project because it was so difficult to take photographs at that time. So rather than talking to the photographs, you'll just see some things coming up, and I'll carry on as best I can to paint the picture for you of what things were like at the beginning. The origins of our project stretch back more than 30 years to the winter of 1989. At that time, Dhofar was still a remote and mysterious corner of Arabia, with a remarkable living heritage that was virtually unknown to the outside world. I was a UN technical consultant with 1 full week of experience, and I had been charged with the daunting task of saving Dhofari pottery, then considered a dying craft, and if possible, to save other endangered crafts as well. Next slide. Acting as a consultant to Huda Al-Ghazali, then Oman's Director of Women and Children's Development, and a formidable force to be reckoned with, I had been invited to attend the opening of the region's first ever women's associations in Salalah, Dhaka, and Mirbat, where I hoped to meet at least a few women artisans and to learn firsthand about the problems they were facing. It is impossible today to express the hope and excitement surrounding the opening of those associations, which were created for the express purpose of empowering and promoting women. All of Dhofar was abuzz, and I was thrilled to be included. In Huda's words, "A nation looking ahead to prosperity cannot ignore the role of women. Only an intelligent, educated, and enthusiastic womanhood can prove equal to the tasks that confront it. You can imagine what a monumental turning point that was for so many women in small villages all along the coast of Dhofar. And Taka, where we have done a lot of our work, was perhaps the focal center of that because it had the most women artisans at that time. So, beside myself with excitement, while we were en route to Dhofar, I begged Huda for details, to share pearls of wisdom, but she just smiled and said, "We're going to a very sparkly place. You will see, and you will know what to do when you get there." As it turned out, that enigmatic description was to set the stage for an unforgettable experience and a lifelong career that included writing The Craft Heritage of Oman together with Neil Richardson, under the aegis of His Highness Said Shahab bin Tariq. I'd like to take just a moment here and say that much, if not most, of my work was undertaken together with Neil Richardson, brilliant, wonderful researcher, photographer, and writer, and colleague in every way. However, this is an all-woman project that we are involved in at the moment. And Neil, if you're out there, here is a short passage from the book that may help conjure for you that sparkly place that Huda spoke of. I'd like to just read it right from the book for you. Dhofari women shimmer in gold and silver jewelry layered over robes of indigo and velvet. Dhofari jewelry is intricate and designed to emphasize movement. Anklets, bracelets, earrings, and toe rings feature small bells that jingle. Clusters of light-catching silver tassels are braided into the hair, and headdresses feature free-hanging chains that sway with each step of the wearer. It was in this gorgeous, jewelry-loving context that I came to know two remarkable women, Tuful Ramadan and Ghalia Ali. And that was when the seeds of the project were really sown. During those first few days in Dhofar, hundreds of women came forward to share their stories and demonstrate their skills, many of which have been passed down from mother to daughter for centuries. Pottery, for example, seemed to date back to the Iron Age, or at least the shards that were found in Iron Age sites could not be distinguished from the pottery that the women were making at that time. However, all were struggling to redefine themselves and their crafts in Oman's headlong rush to modernity. Among these artisans, Tuful and Ghalia stood out as women who had already successfully redefined themselves as silversmiths in an occupation long held to be the domain of men. Sometime around the middle of the 20th century, having recognized a demand for women silversmiths to produce jewelry and ornaments for other women, they had set about acquiring the requisite jewelry making and business skills from their uncles and other male family members. As Tuful recalls, "One day I was sitting with my sister, and her husband, who was a silversmith, came to me and said, 'Tuful, do you want to work?' My sister is an educated woman, and she worked, so I said, 'Yes.' He replied, 'Come tomorrow.' And I said, 'Why wait till tomorrow? Let's start now.'" Both Tuful and Ghalia were naturally entrepreneurial and were also better able than men to understand the needs and tastes of their women clients, and they quickly came to command a large and loyal customer base. In Tuful's words, "An occupation is like a child. It starts small and then develops and gets bigger." Over the next 3 decades, I went on to work not only for the UN, but for the royal family, 7 different ministries, 2 national museums, and together with Neil and Muna Ritchie, helped set up Oman's first not-for-profit initiative, the Omani Heritage Gallery. to connect traditional artisans to the contemporary marketplace. During all of that time, I kept crossing paths with Tuful and Ralia, who never failed to amaze me. Among the occasions that spring most vividly to mind are working with Ralia in the Dhofar Mountains in the early 1990s, and at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. Where she was one of 150 Omani artisans who set up a miniature Omani village and met more than 1,027,000 visitors in a 2-week period. And they also sold nearly $150,000 worth of craft products during that time. Then there was the adaptive reuse of Taka's long-abandoned castle as the local museum, part of my work as an advisor to the Ministry of Tourism. Virtually every woman in Taka was involved in the effort, and it came as no surprise that Tuful played a leading role, sharing jewelry from her own collection for display and supervising the development of a castle gift shop to be operated by the Omani Women's Association to the benefit of local artisans. There was also a visit to Taka with Charlie Watts, the drummer from the Rolling Stones, which included the sharing of coffee and dates with Tuful in her museum-like workshop and underscored the depth and importance of her collection. So, when Famida and I met in Oman during the planning stages of the British Museum's Adornment and Identity exhibition, it was only natural for me to mention these remarkable women silversmiths to her, and the idea for this project was conceived. Soon, if not immediately, Odd was on board, our technical wizard, and Moza brought all of the content and knowledge of the National Museum, bringing all the content of the National Museum with her, soon joined in. And we knew at once that we had not only formed a formidable team, but also a sisterhood for life. Here we are in Salalah, so excited. And I am excited now to introduce you to Moza. Moza, carry on.
Thank you so much, Marsha. Sorry, my video is not working. I have some technical issue, but I will just start my part. Actually, I'm Moza Awadi, I'm director of the collection department. I joined the National Museum in 2009 as a chief curator, and actually I'm one of the key founders of the museum. Next slide, please. The National Museum aims to maintain a direct link between Omanis and their heritage, convey the importance of Omani culture heritage to domestic and international audience. It also keeps the heritage relevant to the modern age. The National Museum is located opposite of the Qasr al-Alam Palace. As you can see it on the top right, that is the National Museum. Next slide, please. We have actually, in the National Museum, we have 14 galleries, and each gallery dedicated to the history of Oman. But this gallery is called The Land and the People, and as its traditional craft, quite important and is representative of the nation, of the people, past and also present, giving the form to the pattern of the life in Sultanate of Oman and the culture quality, showing the faith of Islam, hospitality, generosity, and also community. So as I mentioned, this gallery dedicated to the land and the people, showing how is the geographic context correspond the availability of this resource had shaped the local identity, and also the importance of water, and also the importance of the desert life. And as you can see here, we have a big two showcases, one on the right hand and the one on the left. On the right hand, it's more about the different region, about costumes, about jewelry, and the opposite also of jewelry. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, this is the section dedicated to the jewelry. This is actually it's in the north of Oman, as Famida had an earlier indicated in her slide. To display the traditional costumes and jewelry, ceremony weaponry, and other handcraft, which satisfy not only the basic requirement of human survival, but it's also such a personal and common priorities as ornament, identity, ceremony, and also religious expression. Next slide, please. This is dedicated section to Dhofar jewelry. As you can see in your left hand, this is a full set of the jewelry, and I would like to also thank Marsha because she had helped us also on selecting the object, especially in this gallery. On the top right, you can see the dress of the female. You can see all the details and all the pattern that also includes silver in their dresses. And also the headdresser on the bottom, you can see the headdresser on the head. There's a lot of, with the shawl. It had indicate also the importance of silver. That is the part of the stitching into the shawl. Next slide, please. And this slide, as you can see on the top, this is silver ornament from the late Iron Age that were found in Samad al-Shan in Sharqiya. This indicates the silver is quite important, and it started in an early age. And the one on the two on the bottom, they are in 20th century pendant. That's a collection from British Museum. So you can see the connection that there's a continuity of making the pattern, and also not only that, but also this is give us the important art of the history of silver, what it started in Oman. So as I mentioned, this is the earliest object that were found in Oman and dated as an Iron Age period. Next slide, please. In our collection, is quite interesting is that you can interpret them in a different element, in a different way. So this is a section in the Splendor of Islam gallery. We had dedicated a specific section to talk about the traditional art, examining Oman's earliest design, motif, and trace the artistic influence inspired by Islam, and also in the evolution of calligraphy, geometric, flower, arabesque, and decoration, and also painting of the living. So all of this element, as I mentioned, you can see it in the Splendor of Islam. So it's quite interesting in how we interpret the collection. And as I mentioned, we have similar objects, they are in the London people, and also we have them in a Splendor of Islam gallery. So actually the National Museum, wherever you walked in, you can see silver jewelry in every corner of the museum. Next slide, please. This object, actually, it's in Oman in the world. And as I mentioned that, our objects are quite interesting that we can interpret them everywhere. The great diversity of coinage, once it has been circulated as a currency in Oman, especially in the market, they're quite attractive because they're often made into jewelry. The coin pendant display at the National Museum gallery are combined of a large necklaces, which is actually worn as a form of a portable wealth. As you can see the one here, it's all had Maria Theresa coins, and there's quite a lot of them in the Oman in the World Gallery that highlight also presented of different nations, such as UAE, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, Pakistan, and also India, Spain, and France, and also Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary, as I mentioned, the Maria Theresa Taylor. Next slide, please. We had also dedicated a special section for Princess Salima, and actually with her collection display here provide a rare glimpse of the life in the Oman court of Zanzibar and attest to the quality and diversity of the jewels and clothing of the time. So we had dedicated a special section, as you can see, we have all her collection, the clothes and the bag and the burqa and also her jewelry. So as I mentioned earlier, whatever you walked in the museum, we have silver jewelry in each corner of the museum. So silver is quite important in our culture, and there are always continuity until today. Thank you. I'll pass it now to my colleague Udi to give her presentation.
Thank you, Mauza. Thanks so much. Yes, so as you've already heard, documenting silversmithing techniques was as important to us as the styles, functions, and meanings of Omani jewelry. So I will conclude our talk by a brief overview of the scientific work carried out on mid-20th century jewelry from the British Museum collections and on pieces recently made by Dhofar Ramadan. So Famida and Marsha have already introduced the craftsmen and craftswomen we were very fortunate to meet and interview to know more about their skills and technique, and I will focus on two of them, Salim Al-Shareki from Nizwa and Dhofar Ramadan from Taka, to illustrate the variety of traditional techniques used by Omani silversmith. The scientific study of the jewelry was carried out at the British Museum using non-invasive techniques. So here you've got radiography shown on the bottom left. And then we used microscopy, so optical microscopy, either using a digital microscope, which you can see on the top left, or more traditional binocular microscopes as the one used by Marsha in the bottom right. The final technique is called scanning electron microscope, or SEM. The only difference with optical microscopy is that the illumination source that you use to light your object is not a light bulb, but is they are electron. You've got a source generating electrons. And so you then capture electrons to create your image. This is why you see black and white images as on the screen in front of me on the instrument. And denser materials appear very bright and lighter materials appear dark. So here on the image, you can really see the light dirt that has been trapped between the little spheres or granules, contrasting with the denser silver, which appears very bright. And that you will see on some of the images I'll show later. So Omani silversmiths are using traditional silversmithing techniques, which would have been known and available in ancient times. And here, Salim Al-Shareki, Salim Al-Shareki is demonstrating how to produce silver sheets and wire from a silver bar of quite high purity, which he buys commercially. And he uses cycles of rolling using a manual rolling press, as you can see on the left, with annealing, as you can see on the bottom right, using a gas blowtorch. And so annealing is basically the action of reheating the metal to release the stress that has accumulated in the metallic structure when you are deforming it through rolling. So this is a cycles of rolling and annealing. In addition to, so then once you would have rolled this to a certain thickness, you would continue to make the sheet. In order to make a sheet, you would hammer it. And then again, you would need cycles of hammering and annealing to make sure you're releasing the stress and avoid cracks in your silver. In addition to commercially bought silver bars, Salim also uses scrap silver and coins, which he melts or remelts to make jewelry. And to do so, he uses small crucibles as the one shown in the top right. So once, so here, what I'm showing you are microscope images of objects from the British Museum collections. And these collections were acquired from collectors, Alan and Dennis Cosley, for most of the northern and central Omani pieces, and from Ian MacLeish for the southern Dhofari jewelry. So once the silversmith would have achieved or created his sheets, he would then get on decorating them. So he would shape them and then solder them together if they need to be soldered to create a certain shape. And then decoration and surface textures would be added. And he could have a variety of techniques available. But in traditional Omani silversmithing, the main two that we can find or can seek and document are chasing and punching. Chasing is the technique that deforms the metal from the front by gently hammering blunt-edged tools called punches across the surface. And here on the left, you've got examples of chased grooves here shown in microscope images. So how do we recognize chasing? We recognize chasing because the edges of the lines and the grooves and the designs produced are not very sharp. And so there's no, it suggests that no metal has been cut or removed, like would be the case in engraving. And so only the metal has been moved or displaced. On the left, you can also see on the top left, you can see some cracks in the silver. And that's what I was explaining about annealing before. This shows that this silver, once it was being worked, was not heated or annealed enough. Punching is the hammering of a single design, the second technique, generally repeated more than once. And here you have got traditional punch designs in the middle, and something called matting or graining on the right, which creates a three-dimensional surface texture. And this texture would actually be enhanced over time when the person would be wearing the jewelry because of the dirt that would start to be trapped within the recessed area. So you would have nicely raised, smooth, shiny areas of silver contrasting with darker and matter recessed areas. And the microscope, the SEM images are actually enhancing that even further. A nice example combining all these techniques of shaping and decorating are round hollow bracelets, such as the ones shown in the bottom right from the British collections. So they are worn above the elbow and they rattle with the movement of the wearer. They can also be shaken during celebrations, as you can see in the top right photo. So all the pairs of the pair of these bracelets in the BM collections are complete. So you can imagine that there was no possibility of cutting or sampling to try and identify what they hold inside, the material that makes the noise. So we have not been able to specifically identify these materials, but radiography, and you can see radiographs in the middle, helped us to see them quite clearly in terms of size and density and shapes. And so we could get some idea of what they could be. So although we didn't get an answer in the absolute sense, the very interesting information that we got from radiographs was that all pairs hold different materials. No two pairs have the same in them. So what does it mean when it comes to interpreting or understanding these results? Are these bracelets from all from different distinct silversmithing workshops? Do they illustrate, represent local or regional variations? Or could they have been selected because they make a specific sound, different sounds, and still can come from the same workshop? So unfortunately, we haven't got the answer. But an interesting fact from Salima Shariki when Famida went to interview him is that for him, for example, he's only ever used one type of material when making those bracelets, and they are little snippets of copper wire. So who knows what it means, what that variety in the collection means. So far, we have looked at more traditional pieces from northern and central Oman, and so we'll now look at techniques and artifacts made by Tuful Ramadan in Dhaka. She very kindly offered to demonstrate how she makes the popular twisted and traditional twisted wire touring, as you can see on the top right. And she also allowed us to record her. So this was a real privilege and unexpected treat for us to be able to do so. So here on the left, I hope you can see, she's pulling the silver wire using a pair of pliers through a drawing plate, which and she holds the drawing plates with her feet. And so then once she has achieved the diameter and length that she wants, she then basically loops the wire around a little steel nail So that's shown in the middle. She anchors a steel nail in a wooden block that she uses as a base, and she loops the wire around that, and then she starts twisting the two strands of the wire together to create a 2-ply rope. And once she's achieved against the length that she wants and the twisting, she's happy with what she has. Then on the right, basically what she does is she's hammering her 2-ply rope to make the twisting more uniform. And the final steps, which are not shown here to finish the touring, as shown on the top right, would be to basically shape that twisted wire into a ring. And to get the size right, Dhofar has a cone-shaped gauge, which she uses to make the size she wants, or maybe the size that she's been asked for jewelry that has been commissioned. And then finally, once into a ring shape, the two edges of the twisted wire would be soldered together. Each step was done very skillfully with precise, quick, and very confident movement and actions. It was quite impressive to see. So I would like to finish this talk by illustrating more of Dhofar's skillful work through showing you some of the study that I did of some of her creations, which I'm also wearing here, using a digital microscope. So that you can see the fineness and the very neat work that she's doing, even when we start looking very closely at it. So here is a finger ring with a pyramid of granules on top of it, which you can see it on the top left. And the photo at high magnification in the bottom left shows you how neatly the soldering has been done between the granules and the shank of the ring. And then on the top left, you can see the shank itself, which is made of a strip of silver, which has been stamped into a mold. So Dhofar would have hammered the silver strip from the back into a mold like the one shown on the right, which is hers. And I don't know if you may remember, but Marsha showed that same mold, showing how Dhofar has not changed tools or techniques over time. And this is interesting because there doesn't seem to only be a continuity in styles or patterns in the Omani jewelry, as we've seen before, but also a continuity in silversmithing and technology overall. This is another slightly more complex ring with a stamped shank, again, as you can see in the bottom right. Different motif, though, still some more what we call false beading, made by stamping a strip of wire into a mold. And a sort of flower bezel, which has many elements which Dhofar would have made separately and then soldered onto the bezel. So on the top left, you can see in the center a hemisphere, which would have been made by hammering a silver sheet into a dummy block, like the ones you can see on the top right. So Dhofar would have hammered a silver sheet in the negative shape in the dummy block and then carefully soldered it on the base sheet in the center of the flower. And then you can see false beading again, and then twisted wire soldered onto the base. And we've seen how Dhofar makes those twisted wires while doing the ring earlier. And then a final detail in the bottom left is the shank is made of not only one strip this time, but two strips, one decorated and soldered onto another one. I hope you can see how there's a join going along the length. And then there is a join in the middle as well, where the two ends of the two strips are meeting. And we call that a butt join. This is a very neat join where only the edges are attached together. There is no overlap between the strips. So again, very neat soldering, because you have to remember that soldering involves some heat and you don't want to damage what you have already made. So there is a very precise sequence and temperature control in here. The final example is a little bracelet, which is, again, multiple components, very small and very intricate work. And it is a modern adaptation of the very traditional manjad, which Marsha showed earlier, the traditional body chain worn by women underneath clothing. Here, I'm just showing you the detail of how the figure of eights, which compose the chain, have been made in two different manners. So you've got on the left, those narrow strips bent into an H shape and soldered in the center. And what Dhofar has done is basically hide the soldering points with a sheet soldered at the front, which has the shape of a diamond. So it has a decorative purpose, but it also hides the part of the technical aspects as well. And the other, I hope you can see that, the photo at the bottom in the middle shows another way of making the figure of 8 by shaping a strip into an oval shape and then pinching it in the middle. And then the two ends would be soldered together to close them. And Dhofar, again, has very skillfully and cleverly hidden that soldering point by putting around a ring made of a strip which has been stamped with spiral grooves on it. And then multiple chains and other elements in there. So quite an intricate work again. So we reached the end of our journey into the world of Omani silversmithing, and we hope to have given you a nice overview of the origins of this traditional craft and its continuity through time, and given you a sense of how it is now slowly disappearing. This research, as Famida mentioned, is still very much in progress and unfortunately, yes, on hold. But we continue working on this fascinating and exciting project, documenting techniques and context further, and currently preparing, Famida mentioned it, a temporary exhibition to open at the British Museum in late 2021, early 2022. So we hope to be able to tell you more about this soon and to welcome you there, hopefully. We thank all the people and institutions mentioned here, and we thank you very much for listening today. We also very much welcome seeing and hearing about your jewelry. If you would like to tell us about it, either now or later, we can give you contacts if you want to. So that's it from us. Thank you again. And Nick, how do we do that? Or Stuart, how shall I hand over back to you? Shall I stop sharing?
Yeah.
So if I stop.
Yes. I'll take over. We have just a few minutes left and a few questions to answer. If you very kindly help with those, our participants. First of all, Fahmida, I think at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned an article. You said you would have a link, you post the link to it. One of our people attending has asked if you could post the link of that article.
Okay, yes.
I can't remember, I'm afraid.
Research bulletin. Do you have that on hand, Aude?
Otherwise, yes, I can. If you bear with me a second, it is online, and I can post the link straight away. In a second. In the meantime, if we have another question, we could probably reply while I'm just doing that. If you want.
Yeah, a small number of questions, but it would be nice to be able to address them. I'll have to read them. Sure. They're available to the panelists. The panelists can see them, but our audience will not be able to. So Paula Edwards has asked, could you comment on the value of documentation in perpetuating craft traditions and what happens next as a result of this project? I'm not sure who is the best person to answer that. Possibly you, Aude?
I don't know. I'm happy to answer. So shall I start, and then if any wants to? So
yes, could you?
I just have a value on the yes. So the documentation. So as we mentioned, I think for us it's quite important to document this craft because, in particularly this one, because as we were saying, it is slowly but surely disappearing. Whether we can do anything to revive it, which is something that we very much have at heart, is another question. But in terms of documenting from our various backgrounds, and my co-speakers will correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, for me, working in documenting ancient techniques, whether they're ancient or they're modern, is very, very important before they're lost. I mean, for me, having only worked on archaeological or collection materials from the past, having the actual craftsman or craftswoman to be able to confirm what I can see on objects is absolutely fantastic. And knowing that these techniques, this technology could be lost before we can document it, then we would have to redocument only from the existing artifacts or the results. So I think while we have it, it is very important to document it. I think Famida or Marsha, do you want to add to that?
I would echo what Aude just said, and just to emphasize the advanced age of all of these silversmiths, male and female, in their 80s, and Tuful being the last one who actually practices a little bit. You know, she's had to have, in the last year or so, she's had to have cataract surgery. We've been trying to keep in touch with her family during the pandemic, just to see how her health is at the moment. We were desperate to get back to Oman last year, and we're hoping, if things work out, maybe we'll be able to go before the British Museum exhibition. We're at a critical stage right now in terms of documenting how things are made, how people have adapted to changing tastes in Oman. You can see how this amazing, the body chain, the manjad, you know, which nobody's wearing at the moment. So Tuful very skillfully turned it into a bracelet or turned it into little earrings. So people are finding ways of creating designs that will survive and that people will continue to buy, even though you know, the traditional jewelry is not worn by younger generations. Marsha?
Well, I would just add that, yes, first of all, repeat, Famida, what you said, that this is a critical time for documentation, but at the same time, it's a wonderful time because we now have the capability, the digital capability, to store enormous amounts of information, image material, written material. We have wonderful equipment, as you saw with in Aude's segment on the British Museum laboratory. So this is a time of urgency and a time of opportunity both. And that is one reason we're so excited about this project.
Thank you all very much. We're technically over time now, so I'm just going to take 2 questions, and with apologies to anyone who's put in questions that haven't been answered.
Is Stuart?
He's frozen, I think.
Stuart, we've lost you.
I can answer. There was someone asking about the raw silver, I think, and very quickly, I think I mentioned it very briefly, and I maybe didn't come across. I'm sorry, but the jewelers and the silversmith now they buy silver bars commercially. No, I don't think they use. I mean, some will still may use. Marsha, you may also add to that. But I think from what we saw from Salim Al-Shareki, for example, he was using commercially bought silver bars. They still want high purity silver. This is the important parameter for them. It's the purity of the silver. And they can probably also remelt either old jewelry or use scrap silver for that. How far thalers are still used? I don't think it's the case. Maybe when you started, Marsha, were there still some old thalers that could have been remelted, but now I don't think so.
Yes, in the 80s, certainly it was a primary source, but now no. I would say that one interesting thing, in addition to the fact that the quality of the silver is still very important. I believe somebody asked whether alloys were used, and I've not seen that. But the new preference for gold has created a sort of phenomenon where items are created in silver and then gilded, or even now with using more modern methods of electroplating and so on, with gold, so that they appear to be gold, but they're actually silver underneath. So that is another thing you will find in the souk nowadays.
There's a question from Alia about resources for patterns of, on the Omani silver jewelry. And I think, and what's amazing is on this panel, like just the people watching right now, we have a whole panel of experts who are actually online. And if they want to chip in, like I can see Clara Semple, Ruth Hawley, Neil Richardson, I see Sigrid on there, Seth Priestman's on there, Peter Sitchell, big donor of Dhofari material to British Museum. But anyway, patterns, you can see them in the Craft Heritage of Oman book. You can see them in the publications by Ruth Hawley. And of course, there's the Pauline Shelton and Miranda Richardson book, Oman Adorned, A Portrait in Silver. There are some really close-ups of patterns on the jewelry. I hope, our intention really is to build upon our research and do a very robust publication using some of Aude's amazing electron microscope photographs that people probably have not been able to see, to really zone in on some of those delicate designs and patterns and how they were made. So watch this space. We hope that we can continue our project in that way. And then Seth did you see Seth's comment?
Yes, I saw. Thank you, Seth. It's really interesting.
He says that the patterns on the silver appear on pottery as well, which again, Marsha, could you comment on the transfer of motifs on different media?
Well, that's a huge subject. There are patterns that date from the Bronze Age, circles and dot patterns that are still used today. For example, they were used in stone in the Bronze Age, but are still used in wood today. Patterns that you see used to make silver jewelry, you will also see in copper coffee pots. With the Islamic era, there was a strong influence in terms of geometric and arabesque design that is across the board. That extends from architecture to artistry, and you will see a kind of fascinating adaptation of those designs to suit so many different materials and so many different methods of manufacture. So yes, it's the patterns themselves, and many of them are distinctly Omani. Others are regional, and all of them have real significance as a part of the social and cultural fabric of the society. So this is something to document. There should be, in my humble opinion, a world bank of designs, not only from Oman, but from all countries, lest we should forget.
There is a nice comment from Ruth Hawley, not a question, but how exciting to see how everything has developed since I first became interested in Omani silver 50 years ago. When I first put pen to paper on the subject, much of it was guesswork, and those few of us who visited the souks were trying to save the beautiful handwork from being melted down. I so much look forward to thank you very much for our upcoming exhibition, Ruth Hawley. Oh, that's so kind. Now we have an anonymous attendee. I have some pieces and photos from 1974-76 collected in Buraimi and Salalah. Could they be useful for your research? Yes, they could. Could you post your email?
Yes, that's what I was doing. I am writing.
Thank you. Then I can welcome any information. And I think, as Aude mentioned at the end, we love talking about jewelry, and perhaps there will be a moment in the future where maybe through Anglo-Omani Society we could have a session where people send in photos, and then we could get this fantastic panel of people who haven't been able to speak today but are in the audience, and we could just maybe have a discussion on different pieces of jewelry that people from the Society and elsewhere have collected over the years. Richard Owens asked, is it better not to clean the silver jewelry? So Aude, she's shaking vigorously. No, do not clean the jewelry. There was a moment, I remember when we did the Adornment and Identity exhibition. And so we were using, this was the Northern jewelry from Alan Costley's amazing collection that he had practically donated to the British Museum. And so there was a question that, why is the jewelry so dirty? Like, why have you left it so dirty? You know, isn't that, Omanis would be horrified by how, you know, they like their jewelry shined and polished, but there's a museum policy generally that you don't. And Aude can talk about jewelry cleaners. Go ahead.
I think it doesn't only apply for, as a science. Oh, sorry, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wind this up very, very shortly. It has demonstrated that we need to have another separate seminar, I think, on this subject. Yes. But why don't you finish off yours, and then I'll do my thanks and close it off.
Sure, Stuart, thank you. No, it's just a very general comment on the pros and cons of cleaning, and you'll always have people who will prefer it. It's also a taste. Some people